First of all, a warm thanks and gratitude to Cosmos Foundation for arranging this and inviting me to speak to you this afternoon. Over the next 20 minutes or so, I will touch on some of the issues that relate to security with the current Rohingya refugee crisis in Bangladesh. Some of this is analytical. They range from immediate to mid-term to long-term. The Rohingya crisis in Bangladesh is not something that has happened new. It is a crisis that has been brewing up for a long time, and a crisis in slow motion, because as you can see, the first wave of Rohingya refugees fled to Bangladesh in 1978. We then had the second wave in 1991, and the third wave came in 2012. So we have already had 3 waves of Rohingya refugees coming to Bangladesh, and the current wave of Rohingya refugee population coming to Bangladesh started in late August. And what is noteworthy here is that this is about the fastest flowing Rohingya problem or refugee problem in any country, because we have had over 500,000 refugees coming to Bangladesh over a period of a couple of weeks only. There has been instances when over 100,000 people came over a period of 4 or 5 days. So in terms of speed and ferocity, we probably can go down to the Guinness Book of Record on this. Bangladesh, in spite of what is being said and discussed here even, I would say was very, very ill prepared on the issue of receiving the refugees, because we did not have any prior warning. All our channels of warning that existed in Myanmar, in Akyab, did not really function, so Bangladesh was taken on a surprise note. I remember in the morning the Secretary also mentioned that we did not have a consistent policy dealing with the Rohingya refugees and the current wave, because we pushed them out in the beginning. We said that they belong only to Myanmar and our doors are closed, and subsequently we became extremely welcoming, saying that we will be happy to receive any number of Rohingya refugees coming from Myanmar to Bangladesh. So that is a policy inconsistency that resulted with the flow of refugees. Myanmar, as you can see on the screen, has got a number of ethnic community in its citizenship. As a matter of fact, it recognizes 135 ethnic groups in its own nationalities as citizens or as ethnic groups. And the only people it disenfranchised or took away their citizenship are the Rohingya Muslim population in Rakhine province. So it's a very targeted atrocity on a particular population in a particular geographical locality close to Bangladesh. When we analyze what could be the security impacts of this current crisis, we see a number of key areas on which we need to analyze. They range from human security to internal security to transnational security, the issues of militancy and terrorism, and of course state security in terms of border security of Bangladesh. The analysis that I'm sharing with you is primarily based on the special report that BIPS took out at the beginning of the crisis, which has subsequently been updated, and my own commentary analysis that has been published from RSIS in Singapore. So in terms of human security, the key areas that we are touching in our analysis is human trafficking, food security, health security, and livelihood security. When we touch on human trafficking, we see great problems coming out of the crisis in Myanmar, from the Rakhine province. The Rohingya refugee population that has fled to Bangladesh, especially the current about 500,000 people, are extremely vulnerable to human trafficking. A number of the refugees who are coming from Myanmar to Bangladesh are mostly women and children, many of them without any male member in the family. Our information gathering on the ground has already indicated to us that international trafficking rings are already on the ground. They are looking for potential victims, and as far as our information goes, the trafficking rings have already been able to catch their cats. We have alerted all possible quarters and agencies that we can talk to, and we have told everybody that human trafficking is going to be the biggest problem of the area. When human trafficking happens, then it is also a problem of Bangladesh, because these people have taken sanctuary in Bangladesh for safety, and if now they become victims of international trafficking rings and get trafficked out of Bangladesh, then a responsibility comes on Bangladesh's shoulder. The human trafficking report of the US State Department has only come out yesterday, and I'm sure many of the things that are happening on the ground will be reflected in our next report that comes out of the State Department next year. So we have to be extremely careful, not only for the safety and security of the Rohingya refugee population, but also for the reputation and credibility of Bangladesh. We also see great challenges in terms of food security, and they come from two key sectors. The refugee population in the camps and in non-camps are extremely food insecure. Many of them don't have access to adequate food, or the food that is given out to them don't last the number of days for which they are given out. And this is resulting in malnutrition, particularly with the children and people who are already food insecure. When that continues to happen, then the health condition of the refugees will become a problem, not only of the Bangladeshi people living in that area, but overall the Bangladeshi food situation will be affected. I would also like to say that Bangladesh is already experiencing a general challenge on its food security due to the floods that happened this year, and with the additional burden of the food demand for the refugee population of over 1 million people, this is going to put additional pressure on the food security situation in the country. The health security condition of the refugees is really dire. There is no health and sanitation that has been provided in the first weeks of their arrival. Some very scanty efforts have now been taken to provide some sort of semblance of sanitation and health services, but which is grossly inadequate. The refugees who are coming in are also coming in without any screening. So many of them are carrying diseases which can not only affect their own lives, but can also be affecting the lives of the people in the neighborhood in Bangladesh. For example, a number of them are testing to be HIV positive. The number of them are carrying TB and other diseases. I have talked to some health service providers on the ground, and I've come to know practically that they have already identified 8 new diseases in the Rohingya refugee population in the camps that did not exist in Bangladesh before. And they are saying that unless checked very, very rapidly, these diseases will spread out with the local population and eventually to the Bangladeshi population in general. So here is not only a question of the health and hygienic condition of the refugees, but it is also a security concern for the Bangladeshi population in general. I would also like to say, in terms of sanitation, very little services are available on the ground. The toilet facilities that have been made available to them, to the refugees, are done and dug in a manner which is extremely unscientific. The local pits that have been dug for the toilet services fill up very rapidly in about less than a week, so they again go to digging a new hole. I have talked again to international health service providers on the ground. They have indicated to me that they are being dug in places without taking into consideration the topographical nature of the ground and the earth. Because of the nature of the slopes that exist in that area, many of these latrines or the toilets that have been dug on a very unscientific manner, the seepage is going down to the streams and the water. So apparently we are solving a problem on the ground, but we are in fact creating a major health scare and a major health issue for the local population in general. So in terms of the health issues, there are also a number of other issues, but for the sake of time, I'll only touch on each of the points very briefly, but we can come back to it during question and answer if you have any questions. On the issue of livelihood security, we again see challenges of the mid-term to long-term. The refugee population do not have any access to economic life of their own. So they have to depend on the money or the food or the other essential that is supplied to them, but that is grossly insufficient. So they are getting out to get any sort of earning job in the local community. And in most cases, they are trying to earn at any level or at any rate. Therefore, the wages for the local workers is being challenged by the very cheap labor that is being made available by the Rohingya refugee population, which is beginning to have a backlash from the local community. And if this continues to happen, then the sort of generosity of the local community will not last very long. So that is again a problem there. In terms of internal security, we see several challenges. The refugee population is vulnerable to all sorts of exploitation, and the exploitations are coming in all sorts of forms and from various quarters. I will only, for example, give you one example. Again, a question of livelihood. Since they don't have adequate sources of income or the food access, many of the refugee members are getting involved in what is called survival sex. So they are living on selling their sex, again bringing a local social problem to the area. They are getting involved in petty crimes, which is very, very natural due to the plight of their financial and other conditions. The criminal gangs are beginning to exploit, and the criminal gangs, according to the analysis that we are doing, are not all local. Many of the regional and international criminal gangs are trying to recruit out of this population for various criminal activities. We are also seeing the public sentiments are beginning to slowly change. The initial outpouring of sympathy for the population can very easily and quickly evaporate if the problem persists for a longer period of time. And other fact that we are analyzing is that many interested groups are also trying to exploit this very sentimental nature of the problem, and if they want to do anything on a negative scale, they can raise a backlash against the minority Buddhist population in Bangladesh, breaking down the communal peace and harmony that exists in the country. On a transnational security scale, I'll point out a few issues that are getting involved or can get involved in the future. We are beginning to see some linkages of the drug rings that exist in the area. The area being very close to Golden Triangle has been a traditional route for drug smuggling, and in many cases the easiest people to find or recruit as couriers will be coming out of the Rohingya refugee population. We see similar tendencies coming out in terms of drug smuggling and in terms of the small arms smuggling that has been going on in the area for a long time, can only be now aggravated by the existence of the refugee population. There can be also breakdown of the law and order situation due to the very chaotic nature of the distribution of relief goods and other materials, and we are seeing the early signs of terror organizations who can take benefit out of the situation. Our borders are also threatened due to these issues. We've had a troubled relationship with Myanmar for many years. We have had several incidents at border involving incursions of the Myanmar forces into Bangladesh's territory. We've had in 1991, again we had a similar incident in 2001 when Bangladesh and the Bangladesh border guards exchanged fire and there were some abductions. Our chairman very amply clarified and explained to us the 2000 standoff, which he very rightly called 5 hours away from war, and during the current incursion, during the current refugee crisis, we are seeing several airspace violation by the Myanmar Air Force. Our borders are extremely porous. The terrain and the border area between Myanmar and Bangladesh is a difficult terrain and often very difficult for any border guards or troops to effectively guard. It's a challenge. We are beginning to see non-state actors trying to find out what benefits they can take out of the situation, of the fluidity of the security situation in the area, and also the challenges that face Bangladesh on many sectors. So non-state actors can also become very active and take undue benefit of the situation. In terms of militancy and terrorism, I personally of the opinion that this can become problematic if the problem drags on. Our analysis and our information has indicated to us that there has been public support expressed by Al-Qaeda in Indian subcontinent, or AQIS. We have seen similar supports coming to the Rohingya cause from the Islamic State or Daesh. There has been statements and videos uploaded by several Southeast Asian outfits training for jihad. I would particularly like to mention 2 or 3 groups in Indonesia, in Aceh particularly, who have opened training camps. They have uploaded videos in YouTube. They are calling for a recruitment of a 1200-man battalion, which they are training, and the videos are up in the YouTube, and they're saying that when the training is complete, they will come to the Rakhine province to fight for the cause of the Rohingyas. We have seen similar statements coming out of Chechen fighters in the Russian Federation. We are seeing similar kind of statement coming out from many other Muslim organizations and slightly militant organizations in many parts of the world. This is also happening at a time when you'd agree with me that Daesh is under tremendous pressure in Iraq and Syria, and many of the foreign fighters fighting the battle there are unable or unwilling to go back to their homes. They are on the lookout for a new cause and a new battleground to fight again. And a very convenient, easily sellable cause internationally, particularly to the Muslim Ummah, is to fight for the cause of the Rohingyas. So if the Rohingya problem is not solved on an equitable basis with dignity very, very soon, then this can easily become an international cause where we should be prepared to see foreign fighters coming very close to our borders in Rakhine province, fighting an international jihad, which can become a serious security threat to the state of Bangladesh. We have seen the presence and the existence of ARSA. The rise of ARSA has given problematic signals both to Myanmar and to the region. We are in the process of analyzing exactly the capabilities, the formation, the organization of ARSA, and since the ceasefire ended on 10th of this month, we will be able to see more analysis coming out of this organization. We are seeing the rise of the Buddhist nationalist campaign in Myanmar, particularly in Rakhine, and the 969 campaign is a very, very problematic one. The role of Mabata, the Association for the Protection of the Race and Religion, is a viral militant organization that has been involved in much of the Buddhist radicalism and has also been involved in the practical suppression of the Rohingyas in Rakhine province. So the ARSA's call for an all-out resistance is likely to be met with sympathy for many of the members of the Rohingya population either in Myanmar or in Bangladesh. We have also seen that ARSA has international connections, particularly in terms of funding coming out of Saudi Arabia. It has also linkages back to many of the organizations in Indonesia, in Pakistan, in Myanmar. So there is a possibility of ARSA not only becoming a regional organization, there is a possibility of ARSA becoming an international militant organization if the problem is not solved rapidly. This is the ARSA leadership. There are also severe environmental security challenges coming out of the refugee population in Bangladesh. Bangladesh is already vulnerable to various challenges coming from environment, and the refugee population in Cox's Bazar and the surrounding area in Teknaf is causing severe degradation to the local habitat and the environment. The human-induced degradation of environment will be a long-term problem of Bangladesh. There has been massive deforestation of the area due to refugee habitation happening in a very unplanned and haphazard manner. The kind of the cutting of the hills that has taken place with the deforestation, I can very clearly warn everybody that by the next monsoon season we are bound to see a landslide happening in the area resulting in mass casualties unless we are able to take settlement out of that area into more organized fashion. We are also diplomatically challenged because our diplomacy probably has failed, because our traditional friends have all abandoned us on this issue. And the principal ones that I can mention here is China and India. They have aligned themselves with Myanmar. We have seen the same sort of sentiments and policies coming from Russia. We are seeing the similar kind of sentiment coming out of ASEAN, which has passed a resolution indicating that this is a local problem of Myanmar and nobody should get involved. Only Malaysia refrained from signing the document. All other countries in ASEAN have signed on to the document. We have seen the Japanese are also siding with the Myanmar side, not with Bangladesh. Australia has also openly sided with Myanmar in the resolution that came out of the Human Rights Commission in Geneva in September, and they in fact blocked the resolution that was supposed to come out condemning Myanmar on the atrocities, and the resolution had to be toned down or whitewashed. We have not seen any sentiment coming out of the OIC, so Bangladesh pretty much stands alone here with very little support except what we are getting from EU and the United States. But that again, as I'm sure Brigadier Anam will explain to you later on, is part of international politics and not much of the Rohingya politics here. Just to finish within 2-3 minutes, many of you must be asking the question, why are our traditional friends abandoning us? My analysis here is not only a failure of diplomacy, but also the play of geopolitics and geoeconomics coming into play. The Chinese port in Rakhine has also now got a dedicated pipeline from Rakhine to Yunnan, from which the sui gas that is extracted will be taken on a dedicated pipeline to Yunnan. For your information, the Saudis are also going to build a LNG drop port here. The Qataris have pledged to build a methane drop port in the same location. So this is not only a deep sea port, but this is a major energy hub. What is significant here is that for energy security of China, one of the most vulnerable issue or the point is that all their energy lifeline has to cross the Malacca Strait, which is extremely vulnerable in terms of conflict situations. But with this port in Rakhine, they can completely bypass the Malacca Strait and their energy security is completely assured, because from here they can get fossil fuel delivered, they can get LNG delivered, they can have methane gas delivered, and it goes on a dedicated pipeline and supply route to Yunnan province. So this is a major geographic and geoeconomic and geoenergy security of China involved here. We have similar interest of the Indians. The Indians have rebuilt the Sitwe port, which was bombed out during the Second World War. They have now spent $500 million to rebuild that port. And from the port, they have taken down the Kaladan multimodal highway, which links Sipri port to Mizoram. Mizoram is a landlocked state of the seven sisters of the northern states, northeastern part of India, which does not have any access to sea. By linking the Sipri port to Mizoram, the Indians have now opened a sea access from the landlocked part of India to from the seven sisters to the sea. They have also now opened a separate approach by which they can also survive this part of India even if the chicken snake gets blocked during conflict. So for the Indians, this is of great strategic value, both in terms of the connectivity to the Indian Northeast and also the Indian Northeasters' access to the sea. So with such strategic value from the Indian side, the Indians are very, very reluctant not to side with the Myanmar side. We unfortunately have not judged and analyzed our position very objectively before we try and talk to people. We have to understand the play of geopolitics, geoeconomics, and geoenergy, and then analyze everything on a realpolitik basis. The Rakhine province is extremely vital in terms of maritime communication of the Indian Ocean. And Indian Ocean, as you'd agree with me, is the ocean on which the Indo-Pacific is a part of it, and it's a maritime space where the two powers, China and India, are rising. So this maritime space cannot be lost to anybody, particularly to rising powers, India and China. Rakhine province and its critical ports provide a strategic maritime access to the Bay of Bengal and to the Indian Ocean, and thereby control and influence much of the traffic that goes on in the Indian Ocean and has tremendous maritime value to the Indo-Pacific region. So these are values that cannot be sacrificed or lost by any power that is aspiring to become a regional and a global power. So we have to be extremely smart to play our game. Unfortunately, Bangladesh did not leverage its capacity and its strength with our friends and allies. This is a game that has been won by others who played it much better and smarter than us. We have to accept our shortcomings and try and devise a new strategy how to engage our friends in the neighborhood and beyond the neighborhood. Only then we can find a durable solution of the Rohingya refugee crisis in Bangladesh. I thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your patient hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, General Muniruzzaman, for this very well thought through presentation. You raised several very important points. One of the things that I should like to add here is there is a problem, is there not, when any kind of resistance morphs into an insurgency, and our side is likely to happen, in which case this will become a very sustained operation, and I think all neighbors in one way or another will be affected. With these words, I'll seamlessly move on to the next speaker, which is a very distinguished professor at Dhaka University, Professor C.R. Abrar of the Department of International Relations, and he'll speak to Rohingya refugees and the issues of migration.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for giving the floor. And I also thank the Cosmos Foundation for organizing this event, which is of immense sort of importance. I have been given the task of to see it from what I would think it's a refugee problem. The point that I tried to make earlier on during my intervention with the Honorable Secretary, that at a time, this is surely a refugee problem, and there should not be any mincing of words, and that's the thing that I would like to take you to the end of my presentation. I'm saying this at a time when refugees are being shunned by the world at large. Walls are being created, right-wing xenophobists they are dominating the political agenda of liberal states, liberal democracies. Offshore facilities are being created to take care of refugees. In a sense, 1951 Refugee Convention is being undermined, and states, what they are doing essentially is they are using the national security shield to shrug off their humanitarian responsibilities. I mean, just yesterday an English daily in Dhaka carried that, violating the High Court order, India has sent back 17 or 19 Rohingyas through via Satkhira border, and that's gross violation. And if they were to send them, why Bangladesh? Because these refugees, they are from Myanmar, and these people claimed that they lived in West Bengal for the last three years. So that's the reality in which we are talking about, a refugee sort of situation. So in that context, I'm immensely proud what Bangladesh has done. I think we are in the forefront of defending humanity, and there is no doubt about that I'm a proud Bangladeshi today, on this particular count, and this is something we should celebrate. And when Europe was overwhelmed, by refugees who are coming to their fronts, essentially they are the ones who created those refugees, wars, supplying weapons and whole range of things, and their inability to sort out the mess. That created the refugee flow. But the main discourse was treating them as illegal migrants, thereby, trying to stave off any responsibility, that falls on them, naturally that falls on them. So that's the context we are talking about. So in that regard, surely, there is a reason to be proud of, to be Bangladeshi today. My own experience of dealing with refugees, that began in mid-1990s, when I tried to look into this issue of repatriation of the then, in UNHCR jargon, existing caseload. At the time I felt there was very little institutional memory of 1978 refugee flow. Neither in the foreign ministry nor in the national institutes we could find much information that was available to researchers. I'm sure that they existed, but things they are, all are held on to the chest, for perpetuity, and we researchers have very difficulty in accessing, those sort of those documents. And having said that, there is also very little interest of donor agencies on refugees and migration issues at the time, and as such we felt onus lied on us to do an organized sort of, commit ourselves to look into this particular issue, and we formed our own small research unit, Refugee and Migratory Movements Research Unit. One of the first engagement was to look into the issue of Rohingya refugees. I was privileged to have been invited to the Permanent People's Tribunal that was held in Kuala Lumpur, and I served there as an expert witness. And that was an experience. It was massive in the sense that the way eminent jurists, they were there, genocide scholars, all convinced that this is a clear case of genocide. So that was, on the one hand, a very enriching experience for me. On the other hand, last week I spent 4 to 5 days in Teknaf, Ukhia, and Cox's Bazar, seeing with my own eyes, the problems that are being encountered day to day by these refugees. The sheer scale of problem. I mean, I think we can say that this has not been done and preparation was not taken. Part of it is true, but at the same time, the volume of work, that's there. The intensity with which government officers, the aid workers, volunteers, that they are doing, it's all we should be, in unison in praising those sort of efforts. We may have our differences, but that's something, and particularly the people of Ukhia and Teknaf, the sacrifice that they are enduring, that is immense. And in my own humble way, I tried to jot down my experience that appeared in Daily Star's special supplement yesterday, on this particular issue, the kind of problems that are being there. So what I'm saying is it's a massive problem that we are faced with today for someone else who's responsible for creating the problem. After initial dithering, Bangladesh provided sanctuary to the incoming refugees and secured global appreciation. And no doubt it's a mammoth task, and there are no quick fixes. Surely there are no quick fixes. All of us recognize that. It appears, however, there are problems on how we should be addressing the issue. And one of the fundamental problem is, I don't think, despite everything, we have come to terms with the reality as it exists. And this is where my entry point would be, that I will deal with a few conceptual issues that needs to be sorted out. If we really want to succeed, in the diplomatic front, if we really want to succeed in sending back the refugees in dignity to their country of origin. First, the issue of ethnic cleansing and genocide. I will not dwell on it much. Only thing that I will say is, it appears that it is the favored term of everyone. United Nations, many countries, even Human Rights Watch. Our Prime Minister also stated that, and it was reiterated by the Foreign Secretary. But does it have a validity in international law? Does it have a grounding in international law? No. Ethnic cleansing is not a crime in international law. It may sound very pompous, it may sound that it's bad and all that, but it absolves, the perpetrator any responsibility. And who's the one who first used it? If we jog our memory, it's Slobodan Milosevic. In his defense, he said, I was only performing ethnic cleansing. I wanted to get rid of these people from one place and put them to some other place. So why should we borrow the language of a perpetrator when we are talking about clear and straight case of genocide? That we need to take it to the world. Just because Human Rights Watch uses it, just because United Nations uses it, onus is on us as directly hit people. I mean, we are the worst sufferers in this, apart from of course, Rohingya people. That onus lies on us to state it plainly and squarely. This is genocide we are talking about, because it meets all the standard, the criteria of the definition of genocide. The intent is very obvious. The execution is very obvious, and it has not been executed only in this year. Since the Burmese military took over, the identity of these people were started. They put in operation, laws and regulations which essentially liquidated the identity of these people. As late as mid-60s, Rohingyas figured prominently in Burmese encyclopedia. Burmese, the Rangoon radio broadcast in Rohingya language, and they were very much part and parcel of the national, and we all know about their voting rights, and I'm not going to repeat that. So essentially, Buddhist, in order to be Burmese, you have to be Buddhist. The cosmopolitanism that was pursued, until the 60s, until the early 60s, till Naveen came in, they were all jettisoned after the military came into power, and their rallying point for the Burmese was to get rid of the Muslims of Arakan. And that's the point I think we need to take this into account. And there is, and the whole concept of genocide is based on evidence, is based on jurisprudence, out there. And the honorable judges of Permanent People's Tribunal, and this was not a wishy-washy civil society initiative. This was an initiative, the judges comprised of those who were involved in Bosnian trials, in Rwanda trials, and currently involved in Brother II trial in Cambodia. So these are the eminent jurists from Argentina, Indonesia, and Australia. They sat together and gave that verdict based on evidence that was provided by video evidence. And this is for the first time in any such trial. Those who were fleeing persecution, they just took footages with their camera, and those were presented before the tribunal. And also the expert witnesses, Gregory Stanton, the foremost genocide scholar, he was there to present the case why it should be all the 8 stages that he set out, this particular case sort of met. So this is a point that I'm trying to argue, that we should, take it to the international forum, and argue that denial of Rohingya identity and systematic dismantling of their citizenship and other rights are hallmarks of acts of genocide, and therefore this is something onus lies on us to take it forward. The second, and why actually then countries are not doing it? Doesn't the United Nations know about the ramifications? They do, but they don't want to take the responsibility. The moment you call a genocide, onus falls on you, to do something about it. Because it's called mother of all, it's called crime of all crimes, mother of all crimes. So if you acknowledge that this is happening, then you have to act. And if just look at the perspective, against North Korea, how many resolutions are being passed one after the other? Because there could be a crime against humanity, could be a crime against humanity. We are not so sure. But what is actually happening, on ground in Arakan, is genocide. But hardly any action. So, this is the point I think our diplomats and others should be doing. It's not civil society responsibility only. It's our diplomats' foremost responsibility. We should take this to the international forum. My second point is, again, confusion about, are they refugees? Are they undocumented Myanmar nationals? Are they infiltrators? Are they forcibly displaced Myanmar nationals? This is an unfortunate debate. This is an unfortunate debate because it fails to capture the reality of what we see with our own eyes, what the world is seeing via the satellite television and all that. The narratives that are being presented. Who on earth in the world would deny that these people are fleeing systematic persecution? And this happened in 1978, in 1991, 92, and before even HCR called in, Bangladesh government acknowledged them to be refugees. And in order to acknowledge them, you don't have to really sort of go through the process and do that. These are prima facie refugees. By talking to 10, 15, 20, and 100 persons, you get to know the pattern and see they actually meet the terms, the conditions that are there. And there are many countries in the world, like India, Malaysia, Indonesia, without according them refugee status, they're calling them as refugees. Because if you do not, and so far, the Foreign Office has failed to give us any sort of reason why they should not be calling them as refugees. And 2-3 days ago, that the Honorable Foreign Secretary, the civil society consultation at BIISS, that he alluded to, I was present and I raised this question. And if I remember it correctly, and this was reported by Prothomalo, in response, he said, there are deeper issues involved. Myanmar has acknowledged them to be refugees, so there must be some ill intent for that. If they are acknowledged as refugees, then it may not be possible to send these people back. That is what the Foreign Secretary is. If they are acknowledged as refugees, it will not be possible to send these people back. And the Honorable State Minister also said that we should not fall the trap that Burma has laid for us. Meaning that they have said refugees, so we should not, tell them refugee. We should not accept that particular position. Well, I have my counter argument. The counter argument is Bangladesh did not allow status determination procedure for those who had come from 1992 until 25th of August 2017. It did not allow refugee status determination procedure. So it did not want to know whether they were refugees or not. It preferred not to know that they were refugees. So, was it possible for Bangladesh to send these people back? Because they were not refugees.
Could we send these people back? We could not. Why we could not? Because there is something called customary international law. There is something called principle of non-refoulement, which supersedes even international law. Even if we are a ratifier of the convention or not, we cannot violate that. And my argument is that even Bangladesh strikes a deal, which is unlikely, even if there is some wishful thinking in some quarters of the government that finally we'll be able to rein in the demon and we'll be able to send these people back, that sending back will be illegal, immoral, and will be condemned by the world because it will be an act of sending sheep to the slaughterhouse. Without any protection mechanism, if we send these people back, then it will be sending the sheep to the slaughterhouse. And that the Foreign Office need to acknowledge and recognize. I have a faint suspicion that I think that is something working behind their mind. My argument is also that as we did not bother, sir, I'll finish it on time, because this is the principal crux of the whole problem. I will also go on to say that we did not know why these people were coming, and in that respect we failed not only ourselves, we failed the international community to alert the international community that why these people were coming. To the best of my knowledge, in UN General Assembly, in OIC meeting, in our bilateral discussions with ASEAN, and not even in the Executive Committee of UNHCR, where Bangladesh sits, we have ever bothered to flag the issue of the so-called undocumented Myanmar nationals. So if we had flagged this issue, if we had raised the red flag, that look, something is not right there, these people keep on coming, and they are refugees, they are not economic migrant. And so in a way, so that's the result. I think we will hold ourselves responsible. My second point is this whole new arrangement, because initially they said, the whole idea of intruders, it smacked of demonizing them. It smacked of, they are violators of the law, and it was criminalizing them. So it does not look nice. It did not look nice. So they thought of something interesting, more sensible, and it was forcibly displaced Myanmar nationals. So my counter argument is there are forcibly displaced Rohingyas in Burma. So what is the difference between that cohort of people and this group of people? Yes, there is a fundamental difference, is this group of people have crossed an international border. Yes. And when a group of people have crossed international border, then they're no longer forcibly displaced. They're forcibly displaced, but they are forcibly displaced refugees. They have got a name to be labeled as refugees. And if you go by the strict definition of 1951 convention, and which is not an easy definition, the threshold is very high. You have to cross the border, you have to flee persecution, you have to belong to an ethnic group or of a national minority, and the state concerned is unable to give you protection. And Rohingyas meet all those criteria. In that context, why should not you be calling them refugees? And more important, sir, and that is not according them refugee status would undermine their right to return. It will also absolve the international community of burden sharing. Because the international community said that if there are illegal migrants in your land, or if they are displaced people from their country, for environmental or any other reason, they are not my headache. But if they're fleeing persecution, onus lies on the international community to make sure conditions are created, or at least do their best, so that conditions created in the home country, so that these people can go back in dignity. So I don't know what is working in the minds of our policymakers. And already in Pratham Alu's report, we have seen World Bank has given condition. I'm not saying that I endorse whether we should be asking World Bank for funds for this management or not. That's a different debate altogether. But pinch is there. World Bank has said that unless you call them refugees, we are not going to accord you with any funding. So I think that speaks volume. And final point is, it will also help in our bilateral negotiations and in multilateral forums. We can exert pressure on Burma in doing that. My other submission is very quickly, I'll say, is the issue of, again, it flows from the definitional issue. Because if you decide to accord them refugee status, then you are more or less obliged to give the responsibility, to UNHCR, because that is the mandated agency of the UN system. That is where the UN General Assembly resolution have given the task that to look after the refugees. This is the agency which should be looking after the refugees. So, but if you don't call them refugees, then you think that you can give the responsibility to some other agency. I have no problem. I'm not pushing the barrel of UNHCR. The point that I'm trying to argue, the agency that have been given the responsibility does not have any track record globally to deal with situations of such mass influx. The agency is not guided by the normative, is under the normative framework of United Nations. It's not responsible to the UN. It is responsible to the international, the members, its members who sit in its executive committee. So, this is something that needs to be looked into. Why should you, if you go to the website of the agency concerned, it does not mention the word refugee. It does not mention the word right. Only thing that it mentions is it facilitates return migration. Where I acknowledge that it has got the specialty in it. I have talked to my colleagues in different places in the world. They said, okay, it actually does it under UNHCR and in facilitating return to countries. So why should we be giving that particular agency to be the counterpart agency of the government to coordinate the matters? And there is a lot of resentment. I'm not talking about UNHCR, other specialized NGOs who already have working relationship with these NGOs in different parts of the world, in refugee management. So that needs to be factored in. And here, again, I raised this issue very politely with the Secretary. His response was, I quote, "It's not Bangladesh's problem. It should not be engaged in interagency fight." He dismissed it as an interagency fight. My submission is, it sounds logical. Okay, let them fight it out. Why should Bangladesh government get involved in that? My submission is the stakes are very high. God forbid if any disaster happens, and when we talk about disaster, we talk about immense tolls. If an epidemic outbreak takes place, it will not limit itself only to the Rohingyas. So if a fire takes place in the mega camp that we're talking about, that will have huge sort of. So at that time, world would not care what excuse you would give, about who was the lead agency. World would say Bangladesh couldn't do it. So we liked it or not, this responsibility has fallen on us. It's true. Voluntarily, we have not asked for this. Due to accident of geography, we are now, saddled with this problem. We have to be really smart. We have to be really smart in addressing the problem. Petty interests and other things should not guide us. We should not feel the government is repository of all wisdom and others. There are nationally, this is an international problem. There are national scholars, there are researchers, there are activists, there are people on board, who even have much better idea about how to treat water, treating clean water than many of our national agencies. So we have to acknowledge those and marshal them, garner their support, and put them into action and create conditions so that these people feel, we are successful in this great endeavor. My final point, sir, there is this whole talk about this. Another thing that's being talked about is this issue of, what you call relocation. Relocation, well, Balukhali is an option. There are issues with that. I won't deal with it. We're talking about relocating them in an island. I have written on it, and I've talked to experts and others, and what I write is nothing come out of my own head. It's borrowed wisdom that I collate together. And in that, what we find is, Navy is not the best agency to say whether it is habitable or not, And there are people hanging around the corridors of power who, give information what, people in authority want to hear. So in that context, again, we know that the Char goes underwater during high tide, at least parts of it. There is no livelihood opportunities that can be done there. And if we are talking about 800 to 1 million people being there, Right, I mean, the other day we saw 400 tons of food is needed every day to take care of 500,000 that we are talking about. And if the number is 100,000, you're talking about 800 tons. And if only for food grains, for every day for food grains to go to this 20-kilometer, sea voyage, and sea can be very rough. So ideally, again, I have talked to some persons who dealt with this management issues. They said ideally we should have at least 2 weeks of food in the warehouses, and in this kind of scenario it has to be 2 months. So how big a facility that you would require to ensure the food security of these people? And that's something not, and that's only one aspect. There are 15 different aspects that need to be factored in. And if those people are kept there without proper education, healthcare, and other services, that will be the ground for what General Muniruzzaman was saying. Somalia, you're talking about safety of the maritime route, Malacca Strait. I think that will be the ground to create new sets of pirates, and we'll be essentially sowing the seeds. My last point, again, these are important challenges. World has come a long way since Hitler, perpetrated the acts that he did, which led to a whole range of international instruments being framed. In this 21st century, after having all those, documents, if we still fail to act on this barbaric regime, which is, doing these genocidal activities, then shame on us, and what else can we say? That's something. It's collective shame, not as Bangladeshis. Shame on the world. I'll stop there, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Abrar, for bringing to table some very practical issues, practical problems, including problems of terminology and details as to how to address the problems in its reality. And that's what we are here for. I will now turn to our next speaker, Brigadier General Shahidul Alam Khan. He, as you all know, is the Associate Editor of Daily Star, ex-officer, soldier, and will speak to the international response and position of the Rohingya refugee crisis.
Thank you, Chair. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here and sharing the platform to discuss a very topical issue. My job has been made easier by the fact that most of what I was going to say have been with good intention anticipated already in the first session and these by my two previous speakers. So my job has been made easier. I also acknowledge the fact that post-lunch sessions are always difficult because of the torpid effect of a very good lunch, and that I'm still suffering. Let's see what I can do to sort of keep ourselves awake. Let me start by referring to a statement made by the Myanmar Army Chief decrying the migrants, the Rohingya migrants, and denying history by saying that they are not a part of Myanmar. Now, Myanmar is a very unique case. When we talk of migration, we talk of people moving across borders. In the case of Myanmar or Arakan or Rakhine, as we call it now, it's a question of the border moving. It's not the question of people moving, but the border moving. Look, Arakan was never a part of Myanmar till 1789. It was occupied by the Burman kingdom. It was independent. The Arakanese captured Chittagong district in 1469, thereabouts, and kept it under its yoke for 1.5 centuries. So these people were part of a territory which was part of one single entity. So they did not move from Chittagong to Akia. They moved not to a different country, but they moved for work, they moved for all other reasons, economic, social, family reasons. So to say that they are migrants is totally lack of acknowledgement of historical truth. So this uniqueness we must consider when we are talking about or dealing with the issue, particularly with people who are not quite conversant. By the way, my knowledge of history is very poor, but you may put me right here if you think. Unfortunately, the Rohingyas have been caught in what we sometimes call in political international relations the Malian dialogue. The strong will do what they will do, and the weak must suffer what they must. The strong, in this case Myanmar, has been doing what it has been doing so long, and this comes with some of partisans have described it as a rogue state, are started up by powerful nations motivated by very abject national interests that disregards humanitarian concerns. So we are facing a very uphill task when you are trying to convince our friends, because here is a primacy of economic interest which is being in disregard of other interests. Now, if you want to look at the responses of various countries to this issue, then you have to go back to the very start, begin from the beginning, and that is 1978, 1979, 91, and the various stages since the start of this problem. Because those actions or inactions of international communities, Myanmar's neighbors, have led to the situation that obtains today in this region. Had some strong precipitate actions been taken, both in terms of the political developments in Myanmar and in respect of the humanitarian concerns, perhaps the situation would not have mutated to the intense level that it has at this point in time. So therefore, there has been a lack of empathy, there has been complete disinterest and even reluctance to sort of acknowledge that there is a problem. And the recent example of this is the fact that the Australian government, the Turnbull government, has refused to initiate a UN motion to excoriate this issue, the Myanmar government, for the persecution of the Rohingyas. Whereas it was passed in the Australian Parliament, a majority vote, to take such an action. So there is not only not any action, but there is a complete lack of acknowledgement, refusal to acknowledge that such a situation exists and that something should be done. The motivations are different, motivations may be varied, motivations might be quite unique to the countries that are stakeholders in Myanmar and with Myanmar, but be that as it may, this is the situation. Now the main response, I must say, has been muted insofar as constructive actions are concerned. There has been statements, but there has not been any direction as to how, or there has been no suggestions as to how the world community should stop or address the underlying issue or the causative factor as to why there is the influx or there is persecution and I'll say not persecution but genocide, and I fully agree with Abrar that there is reluctance. I don't understand why there is reluctance to say so, that this is a genocide, because it meets all the criteria of genocide. Some statements, some arguments, some actions have been, well, not so much actions, but words have been critical, but some have been equivocal and non-committal. It may be because of geopolitical interests that has motivated their position that they have taken. But what has been most disconcerting is the fact of UN suppressing one of its reports. Now, I see that as an abdication of your responsibility entirely. And to blame it on one person, as the lead person in Myanmar, and blame it on one person would be totally wrong. Because down the chain, down the line, there was an attempt to soft pedal on the matter and keep it under the carpet. For whose benefit, we don't know. But I think the UN has done a great disservice, and perhaps it has put its credentials on the line. But having said that, we must also thank UN for publishing a report only last week which says that the genocide, the killing, the persecution was pre-planned and much predates 24th of August, when, quote unquote, the ARSA was supposed to have launched its attack on the Myanmar security posts. Now this statement or this findings of the UN puts a lie completely to the excuse that the Myanmar government had been flaunting, that it is because of the ARSA activity that they are taking on or taking up countermeasures to cleanse the area of extremists or terrorists. Now, we have known this all along, and it did not require, in fact, if you follow the reports, the writings, the editorials, you will find that there was no relationship between the ARSA activity or alleged ARSA activity and the Myanmar army actions. In fact, I know for sure that 370 so-called ARSA terrorists were killed, and when one of our agency people asked the Myanmar counterpart how many of them had weapons of any sort, none of the 370 so-called terrorists had any weapon which was lethal, except that I think 3 of them had knives. Now, who on earth will believe that an insurgent group could launch attack simultaneously on 30 camps and launch an attack and how many people were killed? How many security forces? 3. Now, coming back specifically to some of the reactions, the responses, I think I personally, Bangladesh perhaps, and most of us present here would agree that the statements from our Chinese friends, from the Indians and the Russians, have the most depressing, surprising, and perhaps shocking, because the position they had taken was amounted to condoning the persecution, condoning the genocide. One is entitled to one's position, one is entitled to one's opinion, one is not entitled to one's fact. Facts are there on the grounds, and it is totally, as I said, lack of willingness to acknowledge what is happening on the ground. Nothing that was articulated in these narratives, in the statement of three countries, had any bearing with the reality on the ground. In fact, they commiserated with the deaths of the events of the Myanmar security forces. No mention was made about the deaths and killings of the Rohingya minorities in Rakhine. Yes, statements have been made. I think the EU has been very robust in its approach. It has at least articulated some concrete steps that might be taken. We know that diplomatic actions do not occur with a snap of the finger. It has to be graduated. It takes time. But remember, I think there is a Srebrenica, there is a Rwanda in the making here. The event took 47 resolutions between April 1992 to October 1993. 47 resolutions, 42 resolutions, 47 statements were made. Nothing happened till the Srebrenica people were butchered. So I think it is good to talk about graduated response. It is good to talk about diplomatic moves. It is good to talk about course of diplomacy. But remember, diplomatic moves, diplomacy should be given adequate time. But perhaps that it takes two to tango. And if the other side is unwilling to acknowledge, unwilling to, or is on its way to fulfilling or completing the final solution, I think to seek a diplomatic, quote unquote, a diplomatic resolution, I'm for not for a second I am propagating use of force, but I'm saying we have to move beyond rhetoric, we have to move beyond words and do something substantive that would compel Myanmar to rescind its policy. Here I think we come to a very important point I'd like to flag, which I initially did not want to in the first session, and Chair brought out eminently in the first session of the UN and UN importance, if I may be allowed to use the word importance of the UN can be only as strong as its members want it to be. Nothing less, nothing more. It is hamstrung by its veto power. And correct me, Dr. Chowdhury, I think 3 years back it was Canada who took up a move to move a resolution in the General Assembly to modify the veto power to the extent that it would not be usable where there is the issue of genocide. 107 countries have come on board. I wonder whether or not we should all root for some sort of changes in the UN, particularly that which makes its power to implement or ensure security are to be more effective, timely, and effective. Now there was a Swiss proposal, last but one point, a Swiss proposal of integration, resettlement, or repatriation. To say either integrate, repatriate, or resettle. I mean, these sort of proposals should be considered and dismissed for what it is worth. I think resettlement is a non-starter. Which country will take? Why will you be settling in a country? Tell me which European countries or Australia, for that matter, has taken 500,000 refugees in a period of 4 weeks. Which country in Europe? Which country in Australasia? The handful of Rohingyas in Australia have been sequestered in cages. And for countries to talk about human rights and the rights of democratic rights is totally incongruous. So what I'm saying is, you can't talk of resettlement, you can't talk of integration. Integration with whom? The Rohingyas are as Bengalis or Bangladeshis as the Americans are English or British. So therefore, I think we must understand the reality. Last point, we must all understand that Myanmar is moving towards a final solution. Myanmar is moving towards fulfilling what Ne Win set out to do in 1962. And he sort of gave it a formal shape in 1982, tried it out in 1978, because of a robust diplomacy backed by willingness to use force should have been necessary. It was taken back in 4 days. They were taken back in 4 days. So therefore, you must understand that not mere words, but action, because the situation as it stands today has gone beyond palliatives. You need punitive measures. I rest my case.
Thank you. Thank you, Brigadier Anam, for pointing to the dangers of allowing Rwanda in the making to happen, which could lead to what you refer to as the final solution, and incredibly awesome awful term, which dates back not just to Ne Win in this context, but even to Hitler, who did carry out what he thought was the final solution with regard to the Jews, as you know. Last but not the least in my list of speakers is Mr. Asif Munir.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thanks to the Cosmos Foundation for this invitation, and thanks to the speakers before me who have actually made my work easier as well. So I will start with some brief comments on some of the distinct discussions, and unfortunately I could not be here in the morning, but had a brief understanding what was going on in the discussions in the morning and then now. In terms of of course, it's a changing situation, and we see, the drama developing or changing every day or sometimes by the hour. Some of the recent things that I've seen today, and some of you may notice that Aung San Suu Kyi has formed this Union Enterprise for Humanitarian Assistance, Resettlement and Development in Rakhine. And then at the same time, the Myanmar army had formed an investigation committee to look into the atrocities of their military personnel. Whether this will work or not, that's debatable, and if it's an eyewash or not, that's debatable, or I would say that from my side, I don't believe in that. But at the same time, the fact that they are constituting these committees and probably show that there is some kind of pressure from within, or at least because of the international pressure or the criticism that the Myanmar government, the military, as well as Aung San Suu Kyi is receiving, they are compelled to say or respond that they are trying to do certain things with that. But of course, we need to be careful in terms of, not to take things on face value. The other thing that previous speakers have mentioned about the role of the government, duly acknowledged, but I would say that the civil society, think tanks, research organizations, individual researchers, they all have a role to play. My post says here, former IOM program officer, I'm left working full-time more than a year back, and I'd love to be introduced as somebody who's an activist or wants to learn or work on the refugee and migration issues. When I go to the media and everywhere, that's what I try to project. Yes, of course, I've been working with the UN, but again, I do not hold a UN agency portfolio or the position anymore, and gives me freedom to talk about even criticizing about the UN when it comes to that. So just to information that somehow I'm and many others activists have been involved in the last few weeks. There is this People's Commission that has been constituted by the Ekattur Ghatak Dal Nirmul Committee, and they're going to Cox's Bazar in the next few days to collect testimonies in terms of actually documenting in terms of a genocide perspective, and to see if this can be rallied across the world and taken forward. Of course, without the support of the government, it might be difficult. So then, at the same time, the coordination and working together, government and outside, of course, we will all be critical of the government positions, but at the same time, we need to strengthen the hands, because there are certain things we ourselves sitting across this table will not always be there at the General Assembly or at the main tables, at the P5 discussions. So there would be others who will be doing that. And while being critical, we need to strengthen the hands of the government at different levels. Our Myanmar ambassador and so on and so forth. So that's one commission, People's Commission. The other is the Liberation War Museum, Muktijuddha Jadghar. They've taken an initiative in line with the Oxfam initiative of the testimony of the 60. It was, of course, the 60 distinguished personalities across the world, but taking from that format, they're also going to collect testimonies which they would like to rally across the world and through different platforms. And that's again happening during now. There is a team from Liberation War Museum in Cox's Bazar at the moment. Having said that, of course, some of these initiatives look like a bit sporadic, a bit emotional, and not well coordinated among different other platforms. And then the other news that I noticed is that Kofi Annan gave a deliberation in one of the discussions in Geneva recently, where some of the P5 members were present, and explaining how the roadmap in terms of the Annan Commission could be taken forward. We've heard in recent days, analysts in Bangladesh have also been critical of the Annan Commission report, but at the same time, that's the best we have got in terms of some kind of a roadmap or the way forward. It's lukewarm, it's not very clear in terms of the time frame on the citizenship and other aspects, but there are things which there can be discussions with Myanmar government to take that forward. And there's also supposed to be an aid meeting. In contrast to the World Bank initiative, what I felt that the Aung San Suu Kyi initiative for this humanitarian committee that she had formed, because the World Bank, in some news reports, have said that World Bank is considering diverting their funds from Myanmar to the Bangladesh refugees, and perhaps hence this initiative. And so there is going to be another dialogue at the UN for the aid pie in the next few days. So I would move on to the three aspects briefly in terms of repatriation, resettlement, and beyond. Much has already been said and being said in the last few weeks, so there's not much new to add to that. What I was considering is that we haven't seen the repatriation of Rohingya refugees since the 90s. I was much young then. I remember I've just started my career in the development sector in NGOs, and I was actually down in Cox's Bazar. I was working with one of the international NGOs at the time, and actually witnessed some of the repatriation process at that time. People being checked, put on the trucks, actually moving forward, goodbyes, and all that. But many of us have not seen that, so we don't really know how that is going to take place, who will be repatriated. This big question of this list and agreeing on who is a refugee.
Verification. The
verification. Myanmar already had said about the MOU from the 1992, which is already problematic and a non-starter. So in the end, there would be a stalemate. In 2014, there was a bilateral dialogue between Myanmar and Bangladesh, and At that time, there was a discussion of 2,000 refugees, listed refugees, who were already, when the repatriations were stopped, they were still in that list, and Myanmar said, yes, we may consider that. And this became a media sensation at the time in Bangladesh. Yes, repatriation is going to begin. Nothing happened. This was 2014, and only about 2,000 refugees. I won't be very optimistic. I'm sorry to say that. I have, at the moment, very pessimistic view of the scenario. Forgive me for that. So I raise questions more than, opinions that to resolve the issue. So we don't know who and where would they be repatriated to. The issue of their security. Myanmar government says that the atrocities have stopped. The army has constituted a committee, but even in the last few days back, we have heard places still burning. Even if they build houses with this aid fund that Suu Kyi might receive, who is it for? How will they be protected? There are other groups, Mogs and other Rakhine population, and of course the Buddhists, the very much the bully Buddhists in Myanmar. They're there. So how will that actually resolve the situation? Even if there are very neat sheds and houses built for them to go and live in. Security. Who is going to ensure that? Can we really trust the Myanmar army that they will provide security? What kind of security will they provide to the Rohingya citizens, Rohingya population? They don't even acknowledge them as their own people. They would probably put them into what they already have, the IDP camps. One way forward could be, like I mentioned before, is the Anand Commission report. But then again, as I said, it's still lukewarm. It says that in lieu of a citizenship status, there could be provisions that they are given limited mobility, limited protection, and so on and so forth. So, and also the review of existing laws, the laws that systematically deny the rights of the Rohingyas. In reviewing those, suppose the Myanmar authorities say that yes, we're going to implement it in phases. This can actually take years. They can take years to implement the Anand Commission report, the only thing that we have. Then the issue of their identity and their rights. I mean, who is going to say who's Bengali, and the narrative, changing the narrative. I think in Bangladesh we haven't been able to really clarify and make that very popular in terms of the identity. Of course, we know the history, the historical background, but the way they have systematically, for at least the last few generations, in the last 60, 70 years, it's ingrained in their brain that these are Bengalis from the other side, nothing to do with us. Now, in the last few weeks, months, we have been talking about it, we have been hearing about the history from the Second World War, previous, the British period and all that. But history is very soon forgotten. We need, and some of us have been saying it again and again, trying to create a very popular narrative that it's everybody's fingertips and on our lips. In the seminar a few days back at BIS, the BIS authorities very correctly had a one-pager for this kind of the historical background on who are these Rohingyas. We need more of that. We need these in the academic institutions, at the NSU, AIUB, or in the colleges, in these seminars, so that everybody has a same narrative, from the top diplomat to the villager in Cox's Bazar in Ukhia. And that needs to be rallied across very, over the next period of time. We're not going to see a solution very soon. We might as well work towards that as long as this persists. And I've already talked about the rights and the protection. Okay, that's all about the repatriation, and then I'll come to resettlement. There was an official resettlement program sponsored by the US State Department in 2010. 926 persons, only 926, less than 1,000 in 2010. And this was endorsed by the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Bangladesh, the US State Department, of course. And some of these people were resettled in the US, Canada, in some countries in Europe, Australia and New Zealand, but a very small population. And then the Bangladesh government actually at that point stopped that because they felt that this might actually be a pull factor. and also create a tension between Bangladeshis and the local Bangladeshis and the Rohingya community. And this has been brought up, not since October 2016, but this has been brought up by the US ambassador in Bangladesh in the last 1 or 2 years. And the Minister of Foreign Affairs have thrown it back at them, that if you want to have this resettlement, you should do it at that time for the 4 lakh, 5 lakh people, not just a token number. Now, in the current scenario, in the world scenario, in the time of Brexit and the changes in the European Union and the Trump administration, can we really expect that even if the State Department agrees to them, I don't think they would really agree to resettle any number in a very near future, because there are other migrant or immigrant issues at the moment in the world, the Syrian refugees, and of course the wall that the US government wants to build with Mexico. But we may actually try to learn if there have been some initiatives in other parts of the world in terms of the resettlement issue, and also kind of look into creative ways in sort of running other groups. For instance, the Myanmar diaspora. There are activists, but there are also very well-off Myanmar nationals or Rohingyas across the world. They are not always very organized, but many of the Bangladeshi diaspora know the Myanmar diaspora. I was just seeing this news about this person. She's a Palestinian, comes from a Palestinian refugee family, settled in the US, who has come to Bangladesh, was there for a few weeks, tried to help from individual point of view, and then she created this Facebook page called Hand to Heart, and where she had tried to connect with the Myanmar diaspora, mainly for aid, but also to work as activists. Now, the last point, and very briefly about the beyond. What lies beyond? I don't think that, like I said, the issue of the refugees in Bangladesh will be resolved very soon, whether it's diplomatic or other efforts. In terms of the actual physical location, there could be something like regional camps, whether it includes Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand. I mean, if the world really wants to resolve the issue or looking at it, I mean, there needs to be something more than just aid supplies, aid ships, and donations, more than that. Of course, they need to be back in their own country, but if the Myanmar authorities show no sign that there will be, their lives will be not in danger, that is not a solution in the end. Of course, we know that, okay, the solution lies there, but what if, and as far as we can see, Myanmar does not go in that direction, we will be actually sending them to the firing squad. Can the world really live with that? Can even in Bangladesh live with that? No matter how hard it is for us now, while we have been called the mother of humanity, or the world focuses on the good work Bangladesh is doing, how could we do that if we really know now things are going to change on the other side? So some kind of campaign to look at if there could be some kind of regional camps. Why does Bangladesh have to be the total sort of the population? It could be divided up among the region, and with a common understanding, with MOUs, standard operating procedures, and so on and so forth. The desolate island, whether it's Bhashantek or whichever, that has a lot of challenges. Coxbazar itself, yes, it's a big challenge in terms of the demographic pattern is changing there, the economic pattern, and of course, there might be a time when the Bangladeshis living in Cox's Bazar or even Ukia may feel we need to relocate because we don't have enough jobs, we don't find anything to do, and the tensions with the Rohingyas. So for this island, few dangers that some of us have been saying is that people can be forgotten. You put them in an island, okay, that's it, done. There won't be much media coverage, we won't be talking about it much, and in months, they can be a forgotten community. If there is any kind of major crisis happening, whether it's And that can happen even in this mega camp that the government is planning now. If there is an outbreak of any kind of disease or a fire that you mentioned, the whole camp will be gone. And the same thing in that island. Furthermore, in that island, of course, the issue of getting drowned. What about the livelihood? You know, for these last 20 years, Rohingyas were there. We haven't been talking about them much, but they have been in Bangladesh. And they haven't always been provided aid. They find their own way. They have their own survival strategy. What was that survival strategy? You move around Cox's Bazar town, all the tom-tom wallas and the van wallas, rickshaw wallas, many of them are Rohingyas. That's their daily labor. In Ukia, that's what they do. They provide their labor in the fields for the paddy. They wouldn't have that if they go into that island. They wouldn't have that even now if this mega camp takes place, because in terms of the labor, cheap labor, who would give and what would you give if you don't have that kind of work available? And of course the issue of the trafficking. Even in the last winter season, 2016-17, there have been some boat trafficking or human smuggling going on, both Bangladeshis and Rohingya. This might happen again. Now the worry might be that the Bangladesh government or some local authorities may feel, oh, if the Rohingyas are going in those boats, good riddance to bad rubbish. But can we really live with that also? Time is, because this is the time, you know, the rain seasons is sort of diminishing. We're going to the winter. The rivers and the sea would be calm, and like you said, that the boats are there just to take them across. That wouldn't be I mean, if they need to be relocated to Malaysia, that needs to be official procedure to discuss, not through these boats. And last but not the least, I would reiterate the issue of the role of think tanks, civil society, that we need to kind of, you know, some of the suggestions that we provide, we ourselves should need to move forward, either provide that to the government or through our own contacts in other countries, in Myanmar. So we need to build our own networks and work, and not just depend on everything on the government. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for a very structured talk, I thought, between repatriation, resettlement, and pointing to all the problems and very complicated issues on both these items. I will open the floor for any discussions, comments on the second segment. And yes, Shafkat, I will begin with you.
Thank you, Chair. I think two themes that have run as a consistent thread throughout the day. I think one is that there is an overwhelming body of opinion that our diplomatic efforts with Myanmar are not backed by appropriate force. Or as General Zahir said, that there is an impression that we're almost appeasing Myanmar. I think that is an issue that needs to be looked into. I think whether we go into the merits of appeasement and peace in our time and whatnot. But more than that, I think we have to look at the issue about whether none of us are desirous of any confrontation for starters, but at the same time, diplomacy has to be backed by force. And there have been several provocations by Myanmar in the recent past. We can easily surmise that there will be more provocations by Myanmar as the crisis continues, or if it escalates. An article has just been published in the Diplomat magazine journal saying Tatmadar's plan with the Rohingyas, and it pretty much touches upon the final solution that Professor Abrar talked about. So we have to brace ourselves or prepare ourselves for other contingencies as well, and I hope such plannings are happening in earnest. The other thing that has come across, and I think we have sort of touched on this issue but haven't really delved into much detail, is our lack of understanding of the country of Myanmar. When earth-shaking changes were happening in Myanmar's politics, when the reforms were happening, when Aung San Suu Kyi was coming to the fore, there was hardly any reportage on the issue in the Bangladeshi media. Our universities don't have a single department on Burmese language. We are not training any experts on Myanmar. We don't have any expertise on Myanmar within our military. The military educational exchanges between Bangladesh and Myanmar are extremely scant. For instance, the Bangladesh Army would send to the tune of 70 or 75 officers to Pakistan every year, maybe about 50 or 60 to India, and maybe, if we are lucky, 1 to Myanmar. There have been efforts in the past to send serving army officers to the university in Rangoon to teach them the Burmese language, but I'm not sure what has really come out of it. There are Myanmar officers coming to Bangladesh, to National Defence College and other places, but it isn't going anywhere. The first time the two militaries actually met formally was this year, when the Chief of General Staff of Bangladesh Army chaired the military-to-military staff talks. But so I think we have to acknowledge that there is a complete lack of confidence-building measures between these two countries. And as the Foreign Secretary very clearly said, they are a neighbor, we have to live with them. Recalcitrant as they may be, but ultimately we have to find a way to cohabit with them. So I think these CBMs, and not just flag meetings between Border Guard Bangladesh and their counterpart, but multifarious CBMs need to be constituted, and we really need to shore up our expertise and understand what makes Myanmar tick, because I think that is completely lost on us right now. There's probably more research being done on Myanmar in Singapore, which doesn't even share a border with Myanmar, but as an ASEAN member country, than is being done here in Dhaka. We don't have a single think tank which is dedicatedly working on Myanmar. And I think so much of our energy has been focused on cultivating friendships with certain countries who have essentially bailed on us when the hour came, that we have not really put our energy on countries like Myanmar. I mean, our endorsement of One Belt, One Road, I know there's a global euphoria about One Belt, One Road. I personally don't subscribe to it. But the point is, our endorsement of One Belt, One Road, without taking into cognizance regional sensitivities around the issue, we also have to question how wise that is. And whether we really stand to gain from One Belt, One Road and the Chinese plan that the Chinese have for this region. I think this is a question that comes to, I mean, for too long we have been fed this whole thing about our long and great friendship with China. But when the hour of the need came, they were nowhere with us. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent analysis. You're very right.
I just wanted to say that we had a lot of interesting observations, comments, recommendations. But at the end of the day, we will leave this room. Before that, should we not think that what kind of strategy, I mean at least rough strategies, could be prepared in order to see whether soft power helps or whether we need multilateral hard power in order to ensure that these Rohingyas can be resettled in their own country and be secure and safe. Unless we have that, then this is just a whole day's deliberations with very interesting ideas and very concrete, realistic points made, which have not been put into strategy. And as this gentleman said, if genocide is the point that the United Nations takes cognizance of, then let us call it genocide, because we cannot afford to have so many people in this country, and more will be coming. And as General said, my friend, that there will be so many problems of disease, security. Therefore, should we not have a strategy A and strategy B that we can present to the government, which will help us to ensure that we can have these Rohingyas out of our borders.
Thank you, Mr. Musin. Good point. We shan't have a strategy. I mean, that is, if we could formulate a strategy on Myanmar in the course of a few hours.
No, we can't.
We should have been in government and others should not have been.
Yes, yes.
But the point is what we can convey to the public authorities, and so we shall, is a sense of this house. And this is what we are going to prepare. There are two ways of preparation. One would be long preparations, when everything that is recorded will be collated, etc., and matters will be extrapolated. Now, other thing is that since you have so graciously elected me as the chair,
oh, darling, I will.
I will try to sort of formulate some kind of a sense of the house as we wrap up the discussions.
Yes.
With regard to why don't we call it genocide and all that, there is one problem, of course. I mean, you can call it that, but others shan't. So that will lead to problems. So we will also address this problem of terminology.
Yes, yes.
It was pointed out by our brother, we have to conform to the international norms of terminology. For example, the registration without the UNHCR is meaningless.
Yeah, good.
I'm sure you'll agree that the government is registering them. This will not be accepted internationally. We have to follow the international norms and the requirements. The same thing with genocide. That's the language that is understood internationally in the legal parlance.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
That is true, but in the international legal parlance, there are, as I mentioned, four elements that are recognized: genocide, ethnic cleansing, war crimes,
Crimes against humanity.
and crimes against humanity.
The term that helps us.
Yes, but we can't
And
use the
helps the
term that
country.
helps us and get everybody accept that. The whole idea is to build a sense of consensus around one of those terms, so that what we want to happen is enabled to happen through the support of the international community.
No, I'll try and make it as brief as possible, but the panel makes it a bit difficult. I'll just try and address something that Sierra Bra raised first. It was Bangladesh and how it has done very well with its hosting of the refugees. I think before the crisis even, Bangladesh was hosting the 6th largest population of refugees, after the crisis, at the moment, 6th largest population of refugees in the world at the moment. But am I right in thinking, and this is what I want you to clarify, sir, that it is the only country in the world that may be hosting 2 stateless peoples? It's the Rohingya and also the Biharis from 1971. I don't think that there is another country in the world that is actually hosting 2 stateless peoples. So maybe that is something that we could clarify. The other thing that General Muniruzzaman was mentioning, his presentation was actually very, I don't want to say enlightening, because that was actually a bit scary as well, that what could transpire. But obviously it's extremely important.
Too scary.
Extremely important. Our news agency UNB had actually reported over the past couple of days how this term that he mentioned was coming, about the local people starting to turn against Sierra Bra's paper of the 1992 influx, and how then as well people had been very welcoming at the start, and then things started to turn, and what were the conditions that were playing into that. We may see that again, and it's maybe starting out because our reporters are reporting how prices have gone up. You mentioned, sir, that wage rates have been suffering a downward pressure.
Yes.
So there's an economic aspect to it as well. There's also inflation in three of the
Deforestation.
yeah, deforestation. I'm less inclined to castigate, but the inflation rate has gone up, like skyrocketed in Ukhia, Kutupalong, and one of the other ones in 3 of the places. Bamboo prices have gone up from 70 to 80 taka to 300 taka. Fish, 1 kg of fish are not specified which fish.
What's the point you're making?
That's there's also an economic crisis type aspect to the local economy, which I think is also going to be something that we need to watch out for.
Yeah.
And that's about it.
Okay, good, thanks.
I work with the Rohingya NGO. It's a very small NGO, and it probably have
What NGO? Can you
it's Campaign for Justice and Rehabilitation. But it has given me the opportunity to work very closely with Rohingya ground level activists and politicians. What they ask is what can the Rohingyas themselves do to address this problem, because the problem is concerning them, but nobody invites the Rohingyas, nobody tells the Rohingyas what to do, and whenever something like an ARSA attack happens, they are just branded as terrorists. So, many of the speakers have said that it is moving towards a final solution. So, what do the Rohingyas themselves do to survive?
Unfortunately, the Rohingya population doesn't have a clear leadership, so that's a very big drawback. There is also a lack of general quality of education, and large-scale illiteracy exists there. I think we have to first bring them up to some sort of a leadership capacity level before they can take their own causes to international forum. But it is important for them to speak up for themselves. It's very, very important. Instead of us speaking for them, it is much more relevant for them to speak It's a very valid point, but unfortunately the conditions are not right for them to take that capacity at the very moment.
Thank you very much. Do the Rohingya activists have a platform in Bangladesh which will enable them to speak out without getting arrested by the law enforcement?
You would invite them if you could get in touch with them, I'm sure.
No, I think you may invite them. If they walked out of this room, they may not have been free persons anymore, as per the law.
Thank you very much for saying this, Mr. Chair.
Good point, sir. Microphone for Mr. Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving the floor. I think the second part was as important as the first part this morning. I would like to alert a security establishment that we must consider Israel is now on our borders. They are not only giving technology, armaments, but also how to control and displace people. They are past masters in this. So I think this needs to be taken into cognizance. That's why we feel that we must have strong military cooperation with OIC countries like Malaysia, Indonesia in this region, and Turkey, who has really stood up for us. I think this is going to be a geopolitical confrontation. It's not just Myanmar and Bangladesh, because this message of hate, unfortunately the Turkish president has said that on his comments on the Rohingya issue, that we have seen so far Islamic terror, Christian terror, Hindu terror, now we see Buddhist terrorism. So let us not be silent spectators as a new Palestine is created in Arakan next to our country. I mean, this is what's happening before our eyes. So with the velvet glove, we need to have a strong, iron fist. I think the military establishment must take into cognizance that this is an existential threat to Bangladesh in the long term. I know, I've heard that during the second crisis, there was a discussion of Bangladesh army protecting the Rohingyas by going into right up to Arakan. Maybe 20 years ago we were stronger militarily, we might not be so. That is why we need cooperation of countries who have stood by us and who are our real friends. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, so the potential allies that we might have is what Mr. Khan has referred to: Malaysia, Indonesia, and...
I'm not too sure about Indonesia.
Okay, now about Indonesia, I wanted to ask you earlier, you have been very forthcoming about Indonesia. I know about Malaysia, of course, because I know in the ASEAN conference in New York, when ASEAN had their common declaration, it was Malaysia which intervened and refrained from signing. But there I was a trifle surprised that Indonesia didn't do that, because I was hoping, I thought that Indonesia, Malaysia and Brunei would do so, but Indonesia didn't. But still, I mean, Turkey, Indonesia, Malaysia seems to me to be the potential sympathetic, this thing that could be cultivated for the purposes of, should there be
other Islamic countries are all involved in the energy game.
Yeah.
So they will not come with us.
I'll just add something about the Rohingya organizations or platforms. Of course, like I mentioned before, there is a Myanmar diaspora, and there are very well-known international activists, Rohingya activists, and through contacts that's easily approachable. In Bangladesh, it's very difficult because of the current scenario for them to actually right to mobility and free speech and all that. But of course, there are small organizations that have come up, and I'm sure if you're networking within Cox's Bazar, you'll have access to those. But these are very sporadic and small kind of initiatives. But like some have rightly mentioned, that their education level is low, leadership skills are low. There's no spokesperson, at least not in Bangladesh. So that's very difficult. And maybe after if this is a long haul, after the initial sort of the aid supplies, there needs to be trainings, awareness programs for them to actually come up a little bit, sort of having a more voice and organizing, maybe in a low profile.
I have a question to Abraham before you say something. Is this effort to relocate them to a camp is a sign of integration.
That's also a point. Again, at a time when we should be pushing, and Burma has been almost internationally is under tremendous pressure. That's the time we ourselves are sending out signals that, well, we are also thinking of something else about their relocation, and which would give a wrong signal to the world, saying that we are also thinking about a permanent or semi-permanent solution. Not in the camps right now. We are making arrangements somewhere else. So that certainly would be it's a very wrong signal that I think we have put before the world right now if we're talking about it. So I think that should be shelved immediately, and whole focus should be more on in the diplomatic front for these people to go back.
Okay.
With regard to the point that was made here, I'll just respond to one. I think this is something we need to be cognizant of. The Urdu-speaking, camp-dwelling Urdu-speaking people, have been. They are no longer stateless people. And they were forfeited to be Bangladeshis as per the High Court ruling of 2003 and 2008. So they filed a writ petition in the High Court saying that why we are not enrolled as voters. Court said, there is no earthly reason why you would not. The reason being, government petition. I won't go into the details of that because we have been involved in that work as well. And in that, the Bangladesh's defense was, these are Geneva camps, Bangladeshi laws were not operational, therefore citizenship laws are not operational. Court said this is absolutely wrong. And in 2003 they said the 10 petitioners should be made, as citizens. But 2008 petition, court unequivocally said those who wanted to be registered as voters should be registered as voters because they are as Bangladeshis as we were, who were born in Pakistan and became Bangladeshis. The mere fact that some of them opted to go to Pakistan under difficult circumstances, ICRC, it was not an informed choice, and Pakistan did not give them the option whether they would take them back or not. So under those circumstances, the court unequivocally said this was a wrong decision, and they continued to remain to be Bangladeshis. So right now, as far as we are concerned, we don't have any stateless people in of Urdu-speaking community there, and this is something we should, cognizance of.
Okay, thank you very much. I will now have the pleasant duty of concluding this very important deliberations we have had through the day today. The goals that and the purposes for which we are meeting, as I had enumerated in the morning, I believe all of those or most of those have been met. We've had a very stimulating discussion. We were also very pleased, and I think it was, as I said, fortuitous that the Foreign Secretary Shahid was also here. He was able to make remarks on behalf of government, rather frankly, I think, and he sort of underscored what I had always felt that about critiquing the government, as you mentioned, and that is also by critiquing we also strengthen. We also strengthen because we point to the flip sides of the coin and make governments aware of what the lacunae is, and sometimes take to the international community directly ourselves what governments on their own cannot do. Sense of the House, yes, there have been a sense of evolving sense of the House, which is that the kind of nature of the Myanmar polity that General Muniruzzaman had written about, that we should know about the background of what Myanmar, how Myanmar behaves or what makes it stick, that all our endeavors should be focused on getting the Rohingyas to go back to Myanmar rather than look at alternatives which will confuse the global community as to what the whole crisis is about. We must, on the one hand, have a velvet glove, on the other hand, we must have an iron fist, and as I said, while seeking God's blessings, we should also at the same time keep our powder dry, though we deferred this discussion to the very end because there is a hardcore solution to this problem, and we must be prepared to go into that kind of thing with building the right kind of alliances for it. Yes, it's ethnic cleansing, genocide. I mean, this is probably worst crimes against humanity perpetrated
in this millennia, but we have to make best efforts, marshal all our resources, all our diplomatic capabilities in order to convince the international community that that is what is happening. Enormous resources would be required for relief and succor to these displaced people. Maybe we should have these continuous pledging conferences. We should titillate the OIC to raise resources. We should do all our best. I mean, the Muslim community is a very wealthy community around the world, and I don't see they should not be able to cough up resources more than they have. We should activate the UN with all its all the elements of the UN, including the Secretary General's good offices, etc., to focus on this situation. We regret the fact that someone like Aung San Suu Kyi, who had built for herself a tremendous reputation, and we were all a part of it, today we see her in something like a Stockholm syndrome, where she's beholden to those who are holding her captive. This is a big challenge for Bangladesh. We have to respond to this challenge in a calibrated way, and we must start straight away, because if we have a hill to climb, waiting will not make it any smaller. I thank you. The workshop is closed. Thank you.